All right, so in this video, we're going to build an appointment booking application using NextJs, ShatCN for our UI library, Clerk for user management and authentication, Neon as our serverless Postgres database, cal.com as our calendar integration for appointment booking, React Hook Forms, Zod for validation, server actions, really a lot of logics and APIs from NextJS to build a service like this. Now, I have built this in the context of a barbershop, a hair salon, but you can extend it to any business, any service-based business where you would define different services and define different providers or staff that provide these services, and then an ability for the users or clients to book an appointment for a specific service and a specific provider. There are features that we can extend this application by, where I'm going to explain. I'm going to point to different videos and resources throughout the video where I mention a specific technology. And if you weren't comfortable with that specific technology, you can just reference those videos to learn and get back up to speed before continuing with this. So I'm going to walk you through what we're going to build together now, the different pieces of the technologies that we're going to use from a high level, and then we're going to jump to the code and actually build it. Now, from a user perspective, from a customer perspective, they have to come in and they would typically go through the book now. They have to create an account to be able to continue that booking experience. But before we get there, we wanted to look at it from the business perspective, where we would define services and providers, or our admin panel where we have access to this different parts of the business. Right now, I don't have any content or anything created there. So let's just start by creating a user, making them a provider, and creating a service that they can provide, and then hooking it up with cal.com. And I'm going to talk about the team feature in cal.com and how we're managing team events to assign different team members to different services that they can provide. And then we're going to jump into the user flow and see it from the customer perspective before we actually build it. So let's go ahead and create a user. User management is using Clerk. Again, we are syncing our users back to our database using Clerk Webhook. If you're not familiar with that, there's a video on the channel where I talk about syncing your data with your own database. So right now I've created a user in Clerk. So if I go to my Clerk dashboard, I'd be able to see this user that I created. Now in the backend, I have a webhook. We'll walk through the webhook, but for now, if I go to my Prisma Studio, which is an interface to my users, I have two users created, one of which may be for the last time that I ran this application. Let's see which one is created at. So let's delete this one. This is just a test that I run. So let's deal with that one user. I deleted it from Clerk. I forgot to delete it from here. So Prisma Studio, it's an interface. It has recently been upgraded. It looks nicer. You can also access this from your Neon dashboard. It's as easy. You can go to your tables. You can see I have defined different tables now. I have the user here, appointments, no appointments. I have defined different categories already. I'm going to walk you through this process step by step. So don't worry if it doesn't make sense right now, but as easy as logging into your account and selecting the specific project, you can just go to your tables and access your tables from Neon dashboard as well. But we have Prisma Studio running because we're connecting to our database through Prisma as our ORM. And this also gives you a nice interface. So we have our first user. Let's go back to our application. Now, technically speaking, only admins should be able to go to your admin dashboard. For now, I haven't implemented that feature so that we can see it here. But in the admin dashboard, we're using a dashboard from ShatCN. This is where the business owner can see their revenue, sales, and whatnot. A summary of what's going on in the business, appointments, and whatnot. There are different appointments that they can see here once they're booked, customers. Right now, this user is as if it's a customer because we haven't defined them as a provider. I have left the invoices and products for you if you want to extend it. This business can define products if you wish to sell and create invoices for those products or for the services that they provide. Those are the two features that I'm going to explain at the end, which is the opportunity to extend this application if you wanted to make it a full-blown application for a hair salon or a service provider. Now, services is where we are defining different services that our business is going to offer, and team is our own staff, and we're going to make our own staff and assign them to different services and decide or enable users to actually book an appointment. So let's go through that process together. So we're going to add a team member. we're going to use the same email of the user we just created, so it picks it up from our database. So now at this point, the way that I've implemented this is that the user has to go ahead and create a cal.com account, and we're going to ask for their calendar username or cal.com user ID. Now, you can have this where you create an onboarding flow for your providers. We have talked about onboarding on the channel. There's a video where I use Upstash workflows to implement an onboarding using Clerk. So once somebody signs up for an account, we take them through a process of onboarding. Now, you can have a similar feature here where you would just send a link to your users to sign up and then take them through a specific onboarding where you would instruct them to create an account on Clerk, on cal.com, bring their IDs. But here I assume that they already know, they've already been instructed to create a cal.com account, and we just get them their ID. Now, job title, let's just say senior hairstylist. You can select an image here. We are using Vercel blob storage. I forgot to mention this as part of our image storage. I'm going to walk you through how to set that up when we're building the project. So we upload this to our Vercel, which nicely integrates to our project. If you're getting the URL back, that's what we're going to use as the profile image. Now here I could have just shown the image. I decided not to, or it is easy to just get the URL and show an image when the URL exists. I'm just showing the URL here, but you get the idea. So senior, decided to be a hairstylist today. So hairstylist in Toronto, let's say, for over 20 years. All right, so I would create a member. This member is created successfully. It shows a little nice card of the member and the details that we have here. Now I can go back to my services and say, okay, all right, I want to create a service that my business actually offers. So we have service name, let's say haircut. Duration, I've already created durations. Now I'm going to walk you through this. This is already predefined, so I can say my haircut is 60 minutes. I can have an image the same way. So again, let's just select an image here. I've generated some images with AI. I'm using Leonardo, I think. Let me just see. Leonardo.ai to create my images. So all of the images that I'm going to be using here, it's AI generated. So I'm going to confirm the upload, again, using the Vercel blob storage and the easy upload API. So service description, the ultimate, let's say the ultimate haircut. Service price, I could give you the price. Let's say this is $45. What category it is. I've again defined some categories: grooming, brooming, beard trimming, and haircuts. So you select that. And then here is where we tap into the providers that we've created. Because I've already created a team member, now I can select them here inside of my provider. So it's a multi-select component from ShatsCN. Very nice. So I select my provider. Everything is here. Now I can create this service. All right. Now, when I create this service, it is going to trigger a webhook or a request to cal.com to create an event that is for this specific service. And we already have our team members defined. If we go back to our customers, we see that customer is now having a role of provider. Now, if I go to cal.com, under this Studio Edge, which is the team I have in cal.com, I can now see that there is a new event created, the same event that we just created together, the haircut with the ultimate haircut. Now, all I need to do here is to go here for the event setup. This is just regular cal.com. You can define durations, limitations, what days of the week. But for teams, I have this feature where I can go and assign it. Click this button and say, assign, add all team members, including future members, to this event. So all of my team members now belong to this team event, and they can use this inside of their own calendar. So I save this up, and this enables my users or clients or customers now to book events for a specific provider on this specific event. So if everything goes well, we should be able to actually create a booking now experience. Right now, I'm booked with the same admin that I had. Let's just take this through. So I'm going to select a haircut. Now you can see here we have this nice multi-step form that I've built using Framer Motion and React State. I'm going to introduce different libraries for building multi-step forms throughout the video when we're actually building this together. But for now, the first question is that why are you here today? So we are walking them through different categories that we have. These are the different categories we have already selected. So hair coloring, grooming, shaves and haircuts. Since the haircut is the only category we have defined the service in, I'm going to select that. And once you select that, you're going to see the services that belongs to this specific category. This is the haircut we just created together. And if you select it, it shows the provider that actually provides this. Now, assuming that you have different team members, different staff, and each one provide different services, we're narrowing down to only the providers that actually provide this service. So I select this, and this should redirect me to the calendar for that specific staff, for that specific event in cal.com, show it in a nice widget here for the user to be able to go and select a specific, let's say, time and date, and then confirm. This should redirect them back to a success page that they can see their appointment details, but it also needs to trigger our own webhook for an event created in cal.com so that we can also track our appointments inside of our admin dashboard. So hopefully this is also reflected inside of our appointments, or not for some reason. Let's go to our Prisma Studio and let's go there's no appointments here, so probably something went wrong. Let's see if you have any errors here. Book success. So once they come inside API, let's go to Webhooks and cal.com. So a booking was created. This is the webhook that should have been triggered. We're getting the user by email. Okay, maybe it's because I used the same user. So let's actually do something else. Let's go through this from the perspective of a user. So I'm going to create, let's say I'm a user, I'm a customer. I come and see, I wanted to book, and I am going to create a different user. Now this should walk me through the same flow. I'm going to select, and let's say booking this appointment. All right, so now I have my appointment booked. If I sign out and go back to the provider account that we have, and now to our admin panel. All right, so we're not seeing this created. All right, it may be because I am not actually running my webhooks. So let's go to apps. No. Where else would this be? Settings. Webhooks. Studio Edge. All right, so I'm not running the webhook, my bad. So let's turn this off. Let's actually go back to our application. Well, since we haven't created really any appointments here, all we have is categories, durations, and we have one provider, one service, and 2 users, which is correct. For the 2 users that we have, the problem was that I wasn't running the webhook so that the create event actually fires inside of our application to create this appointment. So let's go to this. Now I'm going to sign out of this, sign back in using our user account, which is not a provider. just for the sake of testing it from a different account. I'm going to select a haircut. I'm going to select a specific provider. And let's go to the 14th and select 10 a.m. and then confirm. All right, so we have booked an appointment. This success is just pulling in from cal.com. This is why we have the success page. But on the other end, we needed the webhook to trigger to select our or create our appointment really. So let's sign back in with our staff and go back into the admin. And now under the appointments, we should see an appointment booked for February 14th, 10 to 11. Now, the feature that I said, you can create an invoice. So once you have this and the user actually comes and receives the service, you can create an invoice for them. You can implement this yourself. The main purpose of this video is this flow of tying in these different user models and user management with our Neon database and webhooks with the cal.com and Clerk to sync everything together. You can extend it by creating this invoice. So this is really what we're trying to build. We can now jump into the code and actually implement this all together. So let's go back here now inside of our application. I'm going to walk you through step by step of how we're going to create this. So I have started with a NextJs app. We are using ShadCN. There's a video on the channel. If you're not comfortable with ShadCN, there's a video where I explain how to implement ShadCN in NextJS 15. So watch that video to get up to speed in knowing the details of bringing ShadCN or how I usually set up my NextJS applications, and then come back to this video. Now, from a high level, we're going to have different pages and layouts. So let's start from a layout. We are using Clerk as our user management provider. We have this pattern of providing other providers inside of a provider's component where I'm providing my themes and also a toast provider. This is from Sonar, again from ShadCN to show toast notifications. As you've already seen, when we created a team member, when we created a service, when we uploaded an image, we see a notification, a toast notification. That's the job of this. We are wrapping our entire app with this provider, which is a client component to just share React context. And no, it does not turn our entire app to client-side application. You can interleave server and client components together as long as you're passing your server components as children to your client components. Now, for our admin panel, we have selected this admin and we're sharing this layout. This is where we are having the dashboard. Again, the dashboard is from ShadCN. So let me just show you where you can get these. Now, ShadCN has different components that you can use. It also has some blocks that you can use in terms of sidebars, dashboards, and whatnot. So you can go through the blocks. You can import them to V0 and tailor around. You can get the code for them and whatnot. And you can just select different tabs. ShadCN is also going through an update. And we have, so you can select your components here. The dashboard is what I have used from ShadCN. So this is the dashboard that we had. We had appointments, customers, dashboard, services, and teams, which are really pages inside of this bigger admin layout. Now we have the booking flow, which we're going to go through. We are adding a multi-step form here using React Hook Forms, Dot, and Server Actions to take them through this multiple steps of creating of selecting a category, selecting a service, and selecting a provider, and then selecting the actual appointment. We have the success page where we are redirecting them back to the success page, fetching their appointment data, and showing them here. Our APIs are mainly our webhooks for Clerk, which is going to sync Clerk data to our own database, and cal.com, where we are receiving the calendar events, such as when an event is created, when an event is rescheduled or canceled. I have left this for you to implement, but it is the same idea. We're going to find that specific appointment, that specific user, create an appointment, update it, or cancel it altogether if that happens. So we're listening to events from cal.com as well as Clerk. And for uploads, this is the API endpoint that's supposed to talk to our Vercel blob storage, which we're accessing through this Vercel blob SDK. to actually upload our images for our staff, for our services, and whatnot. So to start this off, let's start from our models, from our data models, which is the foundation of our application. So we're going to start off from Prisma. So we're using Prisma as our ORM to talk to our database. Again, we're using Neon as our database, which is a serverless Postgres. There's a video on the channel where I talk about implementing that in Next.js. So watch that if you're not comfortable with Neon. It has become my go-to database. If I'm not using MongoDB or a document-based database, I'm using Postgres, and specifically Neon. It makes it super easy to spin up a new database to get a connection string and then to basically hook it up with Prisma here. You can also use it with Drizzle. I've used Prisma before and I'm more comfortable with this, but it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Drizzle is also a very good viable option here. So let's go through the different models that we have. So once you create your database, you're going to bring your database URL or your connection string from the dashboard of your Neon database into the local env here. So I've already copied this here. That's pointing to my Neon database. And I've defined different models here that are going to, or different tables that are going to live inside of my database. So first off, I have my users. Users have an ID, email, first name, last name, phone number, optionally an image. So sometimes when they are logging in through Google provider or your Facebook provider, whatever you hook up to your Clerk, you can have your image avatar, but sometimes they don't, so it's optional. Each user is going to have a Clerk user ID, so we can find them based on the logged in user. Each can have a Stripe customer ID. This is thinking ahead if you want to create invoices for them or they want to pay through your platform as well, so they can have Stripe customer ID. Each user can have a role. The role is just an enum I have defined here. They can be a user, an admin, or a provider. Then you can tailor the access to the different parts of your application based on the role. For example, only the admin should be able to go to the backend to create services, add staff and whatnot. Right now, anybody can go that's signed in. They can be a provider so that they show up in the services, or they can be just a regular customer. So that's the role that we have here. And if they're a provider, they're hooked up to a provider table, or they're linked to a provider table. We're going to see that in a second. And they can have an array of appointments if they are a provider, a created ad and updated ad, which are assigned by default by Prisma. We have a table also for services. Every service has a name, price, image, and description. This is what we went through when we were creating a new service. It is going to trigger a webhook to create an event in cal.com and then bring that calendar event ID so that we can show the correct calendar for when a user selects a specific service. We're going to have the cal events log. Every service can have an array of appointments that are using this service and an array of providers that actually provide this service. It can be linked to a specific duration. So every service, like a haircut or beard trimming and whatnot, or whatever service that business is providing, can have a specific duration, a specific category, and then again, created that and updated that. Now, category is something that we've already defined. So we define categories with name, images, and descriptions. It's a one-to-many, so many services can be defined or be linked to a specific category. Very easy. Duration is the same thing. Name and duration, and many services can use a duration. Appointment is another table inside of our database where you have a start date time. That's the start and the end of your appointment. The booking ID from cal.com. So if you're reading this from the event or the webhook that comes from cal.com once an event is created. Any notes, payment ID, if there is anything for later on usage, if you wanted to add invoicing to this. The user that actually created this appointment, it's linked to our user table with a user ID, linked to a service using the service ID, linked to a provider using the provider ID. These are how you define relations in Prisma. I'll do a Prisma specific video on the channel, hopefully in future. If you're not comfortable with, we've covered it a lot inside of our projects, that I never really created a Prisma specific video, but I think it is worth creating a Prisma specific video for folks who are not really comfortable with Prisma and how to use it, how to create relations, how to query your database using Prisma. So for now, I don't have anything, but hopefully in future, actually let me know if this is something useful, and I would definitely create it. So let me know down in the comments if you think you want me to specifically create a Prisma related video, because there's a lot of creators out there and a lot of Prisma specific videos out there on the YouTube that you can search and learn from. Great videos, but I don't have anything. So let me know if you want me to create anything there. So next table is provider. So but once you mark a user or a staff as a provider, I am actually creating a table for my providers because I'm defining different fields here: images, job title, description. I want to assign them a cal username so I can track them, or I can point the user to the correct calendar once they select this specific provider. It is linked to a user, obviously. Everybody has to be inside of our user database and Clerk management. So even our staff needs to sign in so we can track them in Clerk and track them in our own database. They can have many services assigned to them, many appointments assigned to them, and whatnot. And roles we've already talked about. Another enum for appointment status. This is if you wanted to either manually do this or have different statuses for your appointments. I don't have this. Once they create an appointment, it's already confirmed or it's already booked. So you can also make use of this. So this is how we have defined our data model, which is going to power our application. All right. So let's start by actually going to our admin panel and say, how do we create a new service or a new provider? So let's go to our admin. Appointments is something that's automatically created once a calendar event is selected. We're going to review that as well. Customers is any time that somebody signs up for an account on our site, even as a provider or as a user, who would see them in the customers table. Dashboard is the reporting dashboard, services and teams. So let's start from the team. Under the team members, we are getting the team from our database and then showing them basically inside of this list. For each team member, we're just rendering a team member. So let's look inside of this get team. Now, what I usually like to do inside of my lib folder is to define table specific files here. So for example, I have one for my team where I have everything that's related to team. So get team, get provider by cal username. These are user specific. Now, another thing you can do to even make this more safer is use the server only package from React. So you need to go import server only. This is a package from React. So if you search it up, so it is going to, what this does is that you can mark the modules that are only supposed to run on the server, like your database connection or database access layer. And if by accident you import any of these functions into the client-side code, this package is going to give you a build error. So when you're building, it's going to give you an error. Anytime that this is crossing the boundary to go to client-side, it is an extra measure you can put in place to avoid sharing any of these into client code. But even if you're not using that, which is a good practice to do, I like to group them together so I can manage them all inside of my DB, so I know where they're coming from and they're just organized into the actual table or collection in MongoDB that they're trying to access. So the get team, what it does, it uses Prisma, accesses the provider table, and then finds my users and orders them by the time that they were created. And if I pass in the take, so if I want to limit, if I want to paginate this team or in this function, I can pass in a limit, and it only will going to take that many number of documents and return that many number of documents. Okay, so that's what we're doing here, and we're just basically rendering them inside of this page. And just so we know, this is our admin and our team. This is the page that we are on right now. We are fetching the providers from our database and just showing them here. Now, the members is just a list element that we've defined here. We can actually have the edit so that it goes into, right now we don't have this, but you can imagine that you can just click on this that goes to that specific members, and you can edit them, change their image, change their title and whatnot. You can extend the application in that way, but right now it doesn't lead to anywhere. Now on the team page, now when we wanted to create a new member, we're going to go to the team and /new. This is where we have this form that allows us to create a new team member. So let's do that next. So inside of this page, we have a new team member page and the new member form. So as I mentioned, we are using React Hook Forms and Zod for validation. If you're not comfortable with these two together, there's a video specifically on the channel where I talk about using React Hook Forms with Zod and Server Actions. I actually walk you through using it with and without Server Actions, with or without validation, to see why and how this comes into place. I will link it in the description and in the card somewhere, so click on that, watch that if you're not comfortable with what I'm explaining here. So use form is the main hook you get out of the React Hook Forms. It gives you some functions that allows you to hook up your fields and register and handle the submission of the form, setting and getting values, and some form state that you can just hook your form up. So the main thing we have here is the process form. This is the function you want to trigger after your form has been submitted and has been verified by Zod that everything is actually due to your form schema. Now inside of here, we're going to create or call a server action. We're going to look at it in a second. This is where we're going to create a new member, a new team, and then show a success note. We're going to come back to this. But before we get there, let's actually talk about the form from a high level. So we're hooking it up with this handle submit that comes from React Hook Forms. And we pass the process form to it. The reason why we're doing this is that it prevents the default behavior of our forms. It also validates the data before calling this process form. So the data you're getting inside this process form is already been going through. It's already been verified by Zod. Now here we have the email and the calendar username, the job title, regular inputs. We're going to talk about the image in a second, and the text area down there and a button to just submit. So before we go to our server actions and how we actually create this user, let's talk about the image upload. All right. So we have right now just an input for our image URL, and that's how we're hooking up a specific field to our React Hook Forms. We use this register function. So instead of having to set the state setter function and states this register function, just registers this field depending on our use form schema. And obviously the error messages. So this is that same pattern that you would see in that video or for every field that we have here. Now, once we hit the select file, this is going to open up a dialog, the same dialog that you see that allowed me to upload an image. Inside of this dialog, I'm showing this image uploader. So let's see what this image uploader is. This is basically showing an area where you have the drag and drop functionality, or really a feature for users to select a file or an image. So this is what we're doing here. We have a form that has the drag and drop events hooked up that is going to select an image. And once this image is selected, so on image change, what happens is we're calling this on picture change. This is going to create a data URL, which is going to allow us to show a preview. So when we have the data URL, we're going to show a preview. This is what we have already seen here. So this shows a preview here. And once they submit or they select that file, actually, it fires our handle submit on the form. And what this is going to do is going to fetch our API upload endpoint where we're accessing the Vercel blob storage SDK to upload this to our Vercel account. So we post this file as the body. And once we get the data back, we're going to set the image URL. Now, this set image URL is what I have passed in from my form. So if you look at here, I've created this function that's called set image URL that takes in a URL and calls the set value from React Hook forms and sets this a specific field. And then closes that file picker or that dialog that was open for them to select. I'm passing this down to my image upload. So when I'm finished uploading and I get a successful response back, I'm just setting the URL. That's what I need for this specific team member to work the way that I want it to. I show it success notification and error if something goes wrong. Now let's look at this API endpoint, and I'm going to go to Vercel and actually tell you how you can upload images or enable Vercel blob storage. So let's go to our APIs and upload a route. Again, as I showed earlier, we're using Vercel blob and the put method here. We need to send a post request to this endpoint. It reads the file from the request body. That's how we defined it there. It gets the content type and a file name, and use the put method to that file name and the actual file to create the blob on our storage, and then get the response back where we can actually read the URL on the response. If you look at this image uploader, you can see on the response that comes back here, we are destructuring the URL and just using that URL inside of our form. So that's really what you need to do to create or use the Vercel blob storage in your application. It's super easy to create it. So let's, from a high level, go here. Let's go to our team. Let's select the project. So you can go, let me just make this a bit bigger. So you can go to your storage. Right now, I have already created this blob. You can set create database, and you can select what type of database or what type of storage you're looking for. There are 4 different databases you can use, I guess, on a lot of different providers. There's like key value pairs, there's blob storage, there's like configs and edge database that you can add. So you can go through this. I have a video on the channel where I talk about Vercel blob storage or how to use it inside of your NextJs application. So if any of these things that I'm explaining is too much or you're unfamiliar with it, I will link a video in the description and also in the card that I'll walk through this Vercel blob storage and how to implement it in your application, in your NextJs apps. So watch that. So you can just enable blob. This automatically creates this inside of the project that you're in and adds or pastes in the necessary environment variable that you would need to actually talk to this specific storage. You would need to then also copy that environment variable. I hope it doesn't show it here. If it doesn't, so you copy this, bring it into your local dev or local server or your code as well, so to be able to talk and use it inside your SDK. There's a quick start here and a documentation. Again, there's a video on the channel that I have that I walk you through this, so I'm not going to repeat it here. I'm just going to reference that video if you are not familiar with this step. So that's what we do in the new member form to create a new member, upload an image, and create a new member. Now, once we submit this form, we're going to hit a server action. Now, server actions are a new way of handling form submission. So instead of having to create an API endpoint to then post this information to that API endpoint, which is going to talk to our server or database, we're going to use or do that via server actions, which is going to basically do the same thing under the hood by creating that API endpoint, but it's just easier. Server actions are just functions you create on the server, but you can also call them from client. So let's dive into this server action and see what this does. You're going to see the same pattern for our team members, services, and whatnot. We're using the server actions and hooking our forms up. Again, form handling is a specific topic that I've covered on the channel a lot. So if you search for forms or just skim over the videos, you'll be able to see different forms or different videos related to handling forms in NextJS. So definitely reference that if this is something that it's a little uncomfortable for you. So it receives the data. We're going to verify the data again here. Even though this is coming from our verification from React Hook Forms, you need to treat this as a public API endpoint. You need to verify your data. If it needs to be an authenticated path, even though it runs on the server, you need to still authenticate it. So treat it as a public API and do your authorization and verification and validation, data validation as you would do. You should never trust the data that comes from the client side. Even though we just did it here, we have to redo it here. So I verified that the data abides by my schema. I verified that I actually do have a logged in user. And if so, then I'm going to find this specific user, because remember, the provider that we're going to create here, or a new team member, has to actually be in our user database, meaning that they have to have created a sign up or create an account on Clerk, which synced it to our database to create a user inside of our user data table. We're going to find that based on their email, because that's what we provided. So we're going to get the specific user, and then we're going to create we're going to check to see if a team member with this specific member ID already exists. And if it doesn't, we're going to create a new provider. Okay. So that's what we're doing here. I have a to do here, check if a user with the Cal username already exists. So we can fetch memberships from cal.com and see if we have a user, if there's a user with this specific ID, to just make it more robust. I've commented this out, but left it here if it is useful for you folks. So we're going to create our provider, and then we're going to update our user and put their role as a provider. Now, another step that you could do here, right now, we are just doing all of this inside of our data table. So we created the provider, then went back to our user table and say, this user that we just created a provider from, it now has to have a role of provider. So therefore, when I am showing providers inside of my team or inside of my customers, I can actually select to only only show users, because right now in customers, I'm showing everybody. That's basically my user account. I can filter it down because I've already updated the user when I create a new provider to have a different role. I've updated it here. So therefore, I can filter it in this table to only show the ones that have this role as a user. Another step that we can do here once we created this role is also to update Clerk. And the way that I usually do this to assign roles, and there's a video on the channel about roles and managing access depending on roles, or a role-based authentication on the channel. So watch that, where we're using Clerk public metadata. So every user on Clerk has a public metadata. There's three different metadata that you can add to Clerk: public, private, and unsafe. And this depends on who can actually read and write data to it. So reference that video if you're not comfortable with this. But basically what we can do here is that through that same server action, we can also update Clerk to say, okay, now this user has to have a role provider. So if you wanted to show, based on the logged in user, different aspects of your, let's say, dashboard or your feature or your website, and you need to be able to read if this is a specific user, logged in user is an admin, is the provider, is a user, you can also add it to Clerk as well. So we don't need this. I haven't done it in this project, but that's something you can do. And that's the best place for tracking user roles in the public metadata that you can read from the client side, but you can read and write from the server. Once we create the user and update the necessary tables, we revalidate the path and redirect them to the admin team. This is where we can actually see this team member. So this was the flow for rendering our teams and creating a new team member. Let's also talk about our services, which is a very, very similar flow. Once you create one, you'll be able to replicate this. So admin and services. Again, we are getting our services. Again, get services is all organized in the services in the DB. So this is all my database access layer for the services table. Get a service by slot, create a service, format currency, and anything that's related to my services is just all here. Some of these functions can be maybe moved to utility functions. They're not really data access functions. They can go to utilities. You can also organize your utilities based on your tables. This is just organization purposes and how easily you can find and manage your code and my own personal preference. So the create get service here just finds all the services that have a category and duration, orders them. If you want to pass pagination, you can just limit what you are returning. I'm just rendering the services here in a very similar pattern again to our members. Now to create a new service, we're going to have a new service form, but before we need to populate some of the fields inside of our service form, mainly the categories. So if you remember on a new service form, when we come, there are some fields that you need to plug in, but there are some pre-populated fields like my duration, my category, and providers already needs to be populated with my user. So I'm getting the categories, the different durations for my services and my team members or providers and sending them here into the new service. Now the reason why I'm doing it here because this is a server component, so I access my database functions and just pass this values to my new service form, which is a client component because I'm using state and React hook forms to hook up my form. A very similar pattern. Again, we have defined a schema. Let me show you our schema. We have a specific files again for our schemas inside of our lib. Now this is a new service schema, the fields that it needs to have. Again, the video that I mentioned about React hook forms, Zod schema, and server actions is a good reference to see this detailed step-by-step coded in hand so you can walk through that project to actually get comfortable with doing this. I'm not going to repeat it again here using the references that we have on the channel. So we have the schema. We hook up our use form using that schema. We get our functions back that allows us to hook up our form. Similar to what we had there, set image URL, providers, and remove providers. I'm going to talk about this in a second. So let's just look at the form from a high level. We have name and description. We have an image. This is the same uploader flow that we just saw. So we're not going to repeat this. A description, price and category, and then providers. Now for the duration, I wanted to show this here. So we have a select component. This is this select component that chooses a different duration. So we have the duration sent from our parent component fetched from the server. And we are just rendering different select items for this to be able to select a specific duration. So that's as far as the first field that we're going to populate with the data that comes from our server. The next one is going to be categories. So categories again, select. It is reading the categories that we are passing in from server, rendering a select option to just select different categories like so. And the last part is providers, which is very interesting, or the one that I like the most. I got this from ShatCN, so I don't take credit for actually creating the design of this. Is coming from ShatCN, but I have just created this custom component where I'm sending the states and the state setter functions that I need to be able to render this. So I've created this add provider and remove provider functions up here. These are going to actually call the set values from use form hook to set a specific value or remove a specific value, and then to register this, because this is not like a regular field where you can just call the register function just as we called it here with React hook forms to register this specific state setter and updater functions. And the pattern that I have used here is to call this register providers outside instead of the body of the component and get the providers using the get values. So this is the actual provider. So this is the piece of state that I have, if you may. that I'm going to use. So I pass this into my provider selector. So let's dive into this and see what this is doing. Now this is using a popover. There's a combination of components that we're using here. So there's a popover. That's actually where we are clicking to select this popover, and then we're rendering a combo box where you can select and search. So I only have one here, but let's say if I search for something else, it doesn't show. So it's a combo box here as well that allows you to also search for the specific team member. So the popover content, as you can see, it renders a command palette. Again, these are all coming from ShatCN. The command palette allows you to actually search for a specific team member. We are mapping over the teams. For each one, we are creating an item and then closing off our content. Now, every time that you select a specific team member, if you're selecting it, because it's like a toggle where you can check and uncheck, we are basically calling the remove and add provider functions that we pass down to this component, which is coming from our form, these two functions. Right, so this is how we are hooking these two up. And if you have multiple ones, they actually show up there really nicely. So it's a very nice component from ShatCN. So once we have our providers selected as well, similar pattern, we're going to call handle submit. This is going to verify or validate the data using SOT. And then it's going to call this create new service action. Now for the duration that I'm passing into my service action, depending on what you need to write this data, I am mapping over the durations that's passed into this service form component, finding that specific duration so that I can pass it over. And then inside of this create new service action, it's basically the same pattern. We're authenticating, we're validating the data using the same schema that we have. The good thing about ZOT is that you can use it on client side, use the same schema on the server side, so you don't have to recreate these schemas. You just safely parse them, which is going to give you an error or a success message that you can use in your server actions. Anytime that we're returning an error from our server action, I'm watching to see what my server action actually returns as a function, and you can return any serializable object from your server action which runs on the server back to the client side. So I'm reading any errors that I'm sending or any objects that I'm sending. And if there's any error, I'm going to show a toast notification. Otherwise, this has been successful, and I'll show a success message. Okay, so let's go back to our create service. That's validating our data, and then I'm going to create a unique slug name because now I'm creating a new service. I need to create this event in cal.com for this new service that I'm creating. That's the process where I showed. Then after service creation under our cal.com calendar, now we have this new service that we assigned it to different members. So this is what we're doing actually here. We're calling this API endpoint, and we're passing in the data that's required to create a managed event. Now in cal.com right now, I'm using their team feature. So if I go back and I go to Studio Edge, this is the team feature in cal.com. Again, you don't need to use the team feature. The benefit of using the team feature is managed events. So you create one event, you define what the availability is, what the limitations are, and then you can assign what team members have access to this specific event. But you can also have each team member have different events, for them have different calendar accounts, and then manage their own events. And then you just point the user to that correct calendar ID or event when they select that specific user. I just felt like it makes more sense from a business perspective where you have specific events that you as a business owner define, you manage, and then you assign who can actually access or provide these events. So we are creating a new managed event with the information that's required, with the specific location that's needed and whatnot, and some metadata. That is how the form is going to be. That's the form that's specifically for this event data. There's a lot of options that you can pass in when you're creating an event in cal.com in terms of the event itself, the name and the duration and the limitations, and also what the forms would look like once somebody wants to go ahead and book this calendar. So I would refer you to cal.com and the new API documentation if you need to learn more about that, but it's very straightforward. So we would create a new calendar event, and then once we have this, we're going to create the service inside of our own database. This create service is going to call our own access database function, which is going to use Prisma and the data that we're passing to it from our calendar event and the specific provider to connect to whoever that is actually been selected to provide this service through the select providers that are actually providing this service. All right, so that's how we're going to create a service. Before we go to the booking flow, let me also show the customer and appointment inside of our flows. So on the customer, admin and customers, there is a page here. Again, we get the customers from our database. We show them inside of a table. In the get customers, right now, we are showing everybody. We can say where, and then say role is user. All right. So if I do this, now I no longer see that provider, which is probably what you intend to do. You don't want to see your providers in the customers, so that you can update. So you get the customers, you render them inside of a table here. The table is also, again, from ChatCN. Very nicely done there. Now we have a new customer page here, but we're not doing anything. So assuming that you would want to also create a user on the spot instead of them having to go and sign up for an account, in which case you would need to create a user inside of your database, but also send this data to Clerk to also create this user on Clerk. Or you can just ask the users or customers to sign up for an account to be able for you to see them here. So I'll leave that to you if you want to extend the application, but we've already created the page here. It's not hooked up to any form. Let's also look at the appointments. Appointments is the same thing, whereby we have a page, we fetch our appointments. In the appointments, I'm only fetching the ones that are greater than today's date. So I don't want to see past appointments. So if I go to the appointments, I only see the ones that haven't passed. You can make it in so that it also shows the past appointments. Right now, I don't. And this is true. This where function or predicate that you can pass into Prisma that just selects specific documents where, or records where the start date time is greater than or equal to the time that we're running this function. We order them by start date and time, and we include the user, the provider, and whatnot in all of this because we want to know who's the provider, what service it is, and this is the phone number of the user. One thing I want to mention is on Clerk, for your config, you can actually enable phone numbers. This is a pro feature, so you have to pay, I think, $25 a month to be able to use this. So when you enable this phone number, you could select it so it tells you that this works on development, but it is a pro feature if you want to push to production. And you can select it so it is required. So if it is a business that requires for users to have a phone number, for example, you want to be able to call back the user about their appointment. So you can enable this, and I have enabled this in the applications or websites that I have built for real businesses out there. And I really, really appreciate this feature from Clerk because it makes it so easy to require phone numbers, but also to verify phone numbers. Because lots of the times, if you're asking for phone number, in the account creation, probably if somebody wants to just book an account, they would just provide their phone number. But if it is a lead gen tool, for example, most of the time you're going to get crappy fake phone numbers. This is a feature you can use to scrub them or verify the phone numbers before they can actually sign up for an account, which I really, really appreciate. I didn't enable it here in the feature because I had to go through, actually, anytime I want to create a user, I had to plug in a phone number and verify it through text. So I just, for the ease of the demonstration, I turned it off, but you get the idea. Here's how I will turn it off now. So back to our customers, that's where the phone number is coming from. Again, invoice is something that you can expand this by saying, all right, this appointment, this service has been provided. Now we want to create an invoice and actually pay the and actually charge the customer, create a way for them to pay you through Stripe if you wanted to. So that was our appointments. We've seen customers' appointments, and we've already talked about the dashboard, which is just a basic shell of showing some reports and dashboards, which is inside of our admin and dashboard. This is the page that we have on. Again, everything is coming from ShatsCN, the different things that we are rendering here. So with this admin side out of the way that we create a service, create a team, and actually listening and creating events in cal.com and listening to events that come back and updating our services, let's go back to our client side and walk through this book now feature. So let me just actually, it doesn't really matter, but let me actually log in using the customer account we just created. So I'm going to go in here. And now the booking is this multiple step forms, which is really nice to create. And I want to mention some resources in that as well. So app under the book, this is the page where we start our booking flow. We get the categories. This is what we want to show in the first step of our booking form. So in the book form, before I get there, let's go to the get categories. This is again a database access function organized inside of our lib that just fetches through our categories. This is our table that we've defined. It brings in the service. It includes the service. In each service, it includes the provider. In each provider, it includes the specific user. And this is how you just bring in the related resources to one service. And we want this provider, this service to also have a category and a duration. So we're not going to fetch anything that doesn't have that. All right. We pass the categories down to our booking form. Now in the booking form, we are using or defining a multi-step action here by defining different states that we are running. So how I'm doing it is easily using the animate presence from Framer Motion and some state that controls the current step that we are on right now. Let's say on the first step, what we're doing is selecting a category. So we are rendering a radio group, which is a custom radio group that maps over our category. So that's the first step. They see the different categories that we have, and this is what we fetched from our server component. There is a nice little background animation here. So they select this specific category. All right. Now, once they select a specific category on value change, we're going to set selected category. Okay. So first step closed. Set selected categories is going to be this. This is going to go through our categories and find that specific one with this ID and update or really get the selected category. Anytime that we are setting a selected category, we are also resetting our service and provider. So as they move up and down these steps and selecting different categories, we want to wipe out the specific service and provider so that we can take them through the process again. Now, in the second step, they're going to use or select a specific service this time. So we are mapping over the selected categories services because the categories that are coming from our database now has their services attached to them. So we are rendering the services that they have inside that category. And each time we have a selected service, we're calling this set selected service ID, which is going to do that. We're going to map over our services, find that actual selected service ID. Anytime that this changes, we are resetting the provider. And then the next step, we are selecting a provider, which is again going through the selected services and the provider, because every service again that we fetched, we have also defined for it to include the provider. So we've gone through this relational links in Prisma and in our database, and we provided or fetched all of those related links as well. So now we have the provider attached. We provide the radio group for each one, and once they select, we just call this state setter function that selects the specific provider. That's the ID. We map over our providers, actually get the provider here. Now for animation between these different steps, as I mentioned, we are using Framer Motion. And in each step, when we are moving back and forth, I've defined this animate type, which is none, next, and back. Because when we are moving, let's say, let me move this here. So when I'm moving up, I want this to move down. And when I'm moving down, so the direction changes when you're going forward or backward. It can be left to right. It can be top and down. We have a video on the channel where we talk about building multi-step forms using Framer Motion. So if you want to dive deeper into implementing this and the intricacies or the details of this, watch that video as well. I will link it in the description. But basically, this three different animations is for when you are going back and forth with different animations, left, right, or top and down between different states. So the animate can be one of those three, and we have the current step. Anytime that we are going to next, we have a function that sets the animate to next. This is going to define how we're going to animate, and we're going to set timeout and change the current step after some time or asynchronously, so these two don't happen together. Otherwise, you won't be able to see the animation. So this is the trick that you need to do that I've actually learned from a library that I have poked around before called Formity. This is a library that allows you to build forms that have multi-steps and they have animation, or you can add animation to it. So for example, here you can put in Hamed, Bahram, age, and next. It goes to the next step. You can select different styles, and depending on conditionally, it shows different steps depending on what you've selected, and then at the end it shows you that. So you can go through the documentation, but as far as the animation, there is a section here for the animation, and this trick about animating between different steps is what I have, or the trick really to set a timeout to change this current step to be able to see the animation is what I learned from that library. So definitely check it out. Maybe I create a video on this sometime. I haven't been able to actually do it. Maybe I bring in the author and I'll have him walk through building a form using Formity. So I'll include the link in the description. Check it out. Somebody from the community actually also, when I talked about multi-step forms or building forms using ShadCN, also introduced me to this library. I haven't used it, but this is also allowing you to build multi-step forms. I cannot pronounce the name. I don't know if it's Boo UI or no. So this is also a component that is similar to ShadCN or uses ShadCN under the hood, but allows you to build multi-step forms. So using React hook forms and Zot already, which is what we are using, but I'm thinking that this is probably making it easier to build this kind of multi-step forms. So I will include links in the description. Check it out. There's also a link to the source code in the description, so you can check that out as well. So this is what we're doing really for our multi-step forms. This is not using any library. We're just literally using Framer Motion and holding a step and the animation direction, some functions, and a trick to actually see this animation in place when we're moving between the steps. I really like this. And then at the end, when we are selecting a specific provider, this is going to point us to the correct calendar. So that last step, it is going to actually render the calendar component. This is coming from calendar. So let's go to our calendar, which is what we're using here. And a way to actually initialize the app So what you need to do is, if you look at the docs, or even sometimes you can just click a button to share the calendar and find the embed option, and there is a React component you can just copy paste, which basically you initialize cal.com by running this use callback, or this function really that is going to initialize cal.com, and then you would render the calendar component or cal component from the SDK and pass in the specific calendar link, the namespace, and the config that you want to show the calendar. So that's all I'm doing inside of this custom calendar component, and I'm bringing that custom calendar component to my form as the last step. So once I have the provider, I'm going to use that specific calendar. I have the link from the selected provider, which I'm kind of constructing it here, and the slug as our namespace. These are the information you need to pass into the cal component. Again, you can get this from cal.com when you go to share an event or embed it, or through the documentation. Once they select the specific event in the book, we are going to redirect them back to our book in success page. This is the page that they land on. So once we have this back, if you remember, if I go to book and success, I should probably have the ID here, which I don't have now, but they're going to be redirected back here, and we're going to read some page parameters. And from this, we're going to get what is sent back to us from cal.com. So we're going to get name, email, events log, start time, end time, all passed into us. This is what we're actually reading from the parameters of that success page, that redirect or success redirect, once they go through the actual booking of a slot inside of our calendar. So I'm just having a utility function here to format the date and time to show it nicely inside of our success page. Now, this is a server component, and interestingly enough, I'm using the slug and the user to find this specific service and provider. So get service by slug. I can just call my database here, find the specific service that they booked, and also the specific provider. So they have the provider information based on their calendar username. And this is all passed into me. I have the user here, which is basically the calendar username, not the actual user object. So I'm finding those and just basically showing them the information that you have booked this service with that provider on that specific date. So that's the success page that really comes in from the last step of us showing this calendar form. Once they select this, once they book this, they're going to be redirected back to our page. Now, let's go to cal for a second. So on booking, this is where we are setting our redirect. So on booking, I'm redirecting to our local development server through ngrok. And the reason why I'm doing ngrok is that webhooks only work with HTTPS. So if you're running local development on NextJs server, it won't work. So you have to set up a local tunnel. You can have it a specific domain like mine, or just use the domains that ngrok has. So you could just use ngrok for this service. I'm assuming a lot of this you already know, but ngrok is just going to create a tunnel to your local development. You can just, it's very easily set up. So we're using that and we're redirecting the users. This is where the redirection happens. So the last step of our form, they just book an event, and on booking, we are redirecting them back here. This is where you as a business owner or the developer would set up for the business to define what happens. And I've selected this tick to say forward the parameters, the email name, and more. This is how I'm actually reading all of this from the search parameter on the success page to know what this user actually have done. Now, another way to do this instead of on the success page, well, you have to do this on the success page anyways, because this is where we are actually just showing a confirmation. We are not writing anything to our database. And remember, when we are creating an event in cal.com, we are hitting our webhook as well. That's why we turned on our webhook. So inside of our webhook, we had this cal.com. And once a booking is created, we're going to write a new appointment to our database. So we are not depending on this success page that we are on for actually recording our appointment. This is just to show the message or the success confirmation of the details of the appointment that they booked, that we're just literally getting from the redirect URL from cal.com. But then Cal is going to trigger a event. We're going to listen to that webhook event, and then we're going to create an appointment inside of our database with the specific user and the provider and the specific appointment that they have booked, so that we can actually go ahead and see this inside of our application's admin dashboard. So I think we have covered everything, all of the flows here, starting from our database models, how we're thinking about different tables that we have from our services, users, providers, categories, and durations and whatnot. We walked through creating forms to create a new service, create a new team member and provider. We talked about syncing our data from Clerk to our own database. We talked about adding flows for onboarding, for example, onboarding a specific user, onboarding a provider, managing the admin dashboard. We talked about our appointments or customers and what you can do with it. There are chances to extend this application from the invoices and whether or not this specific business wants to sell physical products, not only services. We talked about the booking flow, which is going to take users through a multi-step form that allows them to select a category, a service, a provider, then book a slot on our calendar, which is going to trigger a webhook to create an appointment, show them a success message, and the stuff that you need to do to integrate cal.com with your own service. We talked about the team feature in cal.com, which allows you as the business owner to manage events and assign users on who can actually access what event. So therefore, we can point the user to the specific calendar event that we want. You can do this probably without the team feature. You can do this with other calendar apps as well. I would probably create another project on using just Google Calendar to manage such a thing instead of just using cal.com. But I love cal.com. I use it. You probably have seen it, my own stuff inside the tutorial here. I use cal.com for managing my own calendar. It nicely integrates into Google Calendar, and it has a really nice API that you can use, way better than other apps that I've used before. I've used Calendly before, and I think cal.com is way better, way more modern. The API is way nicer. It is built with the API in mind, whereas Calendly is just a widget. It feels like they have built the API afterwards, and sometimes you can't do stuff there, or it's just very convoluted the way that you need to do stuff. But I've used Calendly before, so I don't want to bash them down, but I prefer cal.com here. But you're not necessarily need to use any of these features. You can probably use Google Calendar, and probably I would do a video on that as well. If you have any questions, like always, hit me down in the comments. If I've missed anything, let me know, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.